Greetings, superior beings, greetings, supreme being. We are all the human race. Our common enemy is death. Welcome on Play. I'm Ulrich Hoffman. Universal peace now. This is the broadcast. Russia, Ukraine, President Zelensky bans men aged 18 to 60 from leaving country. I think that's wrong. I think that the innocent civilians are not military and they should not be ordered to stay behind when their wives and children are evacuated. I think that's horrible. So that's just my own opinion about it. Let's start with the search that I did first, using the Brave browser, which is super fast. I like Brave. And I'm looking for my VCam. Okay, I'm placing it here. Transform, reverse, flip horizontal, and then I can fade in again. So I did a search on Zelensky refuses evacuation of men plus women plus children minus offer. And then we get Zelensky defiant, Ukrainian president refuses US offer to evacuate. Ukraine's President Zelensky offered evacuation by US. Louder with Crowder.com. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky offered US evacuation flight, but ... independent co UK. So that's when I tried to find Zelensky ordering men to stay behind, only allowing women and children to evacuate. But then I searched on men not allowed to leave, must fight plus Ukraine. Then the first result is Ukraine urged to take, quote, humane, unquote, approach as men try to flee. TheGuardian.com is the first result. Why banning men from leaving Ukraine violates their human rights. TheConversation.com, I'll be reading that. And then CNN again, Ukrainian males aged 18 to 60 are banned from leaving the country. So let's start with these articles that I found. Ukraine men ordered to stay and fight Russia as others flee. February 25th, 2022, New York Post, nypost.com. Fighting age Ukrainian men have been ordered to stay behind as tens of thousands of civilians flee the country amid intensified fighting. Russia-Ukraine war. Zelensky forbids men aged 18 to 60 from leaving Ukraine as Russian ground troops move closer. February 25th, same date as Zelensky signed a decree on the general mobilization of population in the wake of Ukraine invasion. All men aged 18 to 60 are forbidden to leave the country. Republicworld.com. Why banning men from leaving Ukraine violates their human rights. March 8th, 2022. TheConversation.com. As Ukraine scrambles to defend itself from Russia's illegal invasion, men aged 18 to 60 have been banned from leaving the country. Next, LedBible.com. Ukrainian president orders the release of all prisoners with combat experience. Ukraine releases prisoners with, quote, combat experience, unquote, to help fight Russia. Newsweek reported on the 28th of February. And Led Bible, also 28th of February. So they seem to be getting their stories from some source. Don't know if that's Reuters or whatever. And they all report the same. Quote, news, unquote. Newsweek.com. Next, Russia, Ukraine. President Zelensky bans men aged 18 to 60 from leaving country. Tory.ng. I also read that because the title also reveals more than the others. Basically, February 25th, 2022, the ban will be in place for the duration of martial law, which was imposed by President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday morning. Google News, when we search on Ukraine, I can update that also. ABC News 1 hour ago, Russia-Ukraine live updates, at least 30 killed, over 100 injured in attack on Ukrainian train station. A ceasefire, perhaps it's a good idea to read the wiki article. I gave 5 ways to end this war. Any speech errors are made with the AI. Five ways you could end this war. Surrender Zelensky. 2. Stop sanctioning and let Putin invade. 3. Putin, pull back the troops, do not invade. Stop the illegal invasion of the sovereign state Ukraine. Stop bombing innocent civilians. Stop perpetrating war crimes against humanity. 4. Turn Ukraine into a neutral zone. 5. Arm 40 million Ukrainians. Sanction war criminal Putin, not the world. Ceasefire, that's what it looks like on Wiki. And then we have IsraelNationalNews.com. Assad, quote, Zionist Jew, unquote, Zelensky is a Nazi supporter. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad told supporters that Israel and the West were, quote, lying, unquote, to the world in their condemnations of Nazism. Well, I've covered in previous broadcasts that they are Zionist coadjutors. Here we see a picture of Zelensky with the current Pope Bergoglio, and the letter or the ASCII code value of the name Bergoglio written in capital letters, uppercase, is 666. And he is, of course, the first Jesuit Pope. But there are other pictures. Here we see, for example, Zelensky with the Pope, and note the painting behind it. Here Putin with the Pope in front of the same painting, also with Lavrov on the Pope's left, and here Biden, Joe Biden, and Pope Bergoglio all in front of that same painting. Trudeau and the Pope. And their leader is, of course, Arturo Sosa, the leader of the Jesuits. And of course, that was Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, which will also be invaded based on a prophecy that I've covered in previous broadcasts. I can show that again because it's quite special. The US Sun. Ooh. I haven't opened that yet in Brave, so it's not in my computer's memory yet. But I found the article already. There. War, you believe it? War between Russia and Ukraine would lead to the, quote, coming of the Messiah, unquote, says 300-year-old Jewish prophecy. Vilna Gaon, Rabbi, and he is said to have handed down a prophecy to his son that said, quote, "When you hear that the Russians have captured the city of Crimea, you should know that the times of the Messiah have started, that his steps are being heard. And when you hear that the Russians have reached the city of Constantinople, you should put on your Shabbat clothes and don't take them off, because it means that the Messiah is about to come any minute." And Constantinople, of course, is currently Istanbul, Turkey. So that's why that invasion of Turkey is also predicted, basically. So half of the prophecy has come true, you could argue. Then there was one other picture that I remember. Not even sure if it's in here. Yeah. Adolf Hitler was not only funded by the Knights of Malta, but the Vatican placed him in power. Sources claim Biden is also a Knight of Malta, like Hitler used to be. For example, Knight of Malta Franz von Papen from the Center Party helped the Nazis to receive political power in the German parliament. Let's start reading some articles. I wanted to start with Tory.ng. Well, it's not lengthy, so let's just start reading.
Russia-Ukraine, President Zelensky bans men aged 18 to 60 from leaving country, posted by Thandi Ubani on 25th of February, 2022, Torai.ing. The ban will be in place for the duration of martial law, which was imposed by President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday morning. Males between the ages of 18 and 60 have been banned from leaving Ukraine. This comes following invasion of the country by Russia. Ukraine's State Border Guard Service, DPSA, reported. The ban will be in place for the duration of martial law, which was imposed by President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday morning after Russia attacked Ukraine. The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine reports that due to the imposition of martial law in Ukraine, a certain category of citizens is temporarily restricted from leaving Ukraine, the country's Interior Ministry also announced at midnight via telegram. In particular, male citizens of Ukraine aged 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving Ukraine. This rule will apply for the period of martial law. "We ask citizens to take this information into account," he said. Anyone caught violating martial law could end up facing military tribunals. The DPSA said the ban on males leaving the country is to guarantee Ukraine's defense and organization of timely mobilization. Ukrainian president also urged any Ukrainian citizen with a passport willing to fight to come forward, and promised weapons for anyone.
Well, I think what needs to be said is that Biden, Zelensky, and Putin are all Zionists, and it seems like they're building up to that cyber attack on the global financial system, the power supply, and the internet that Biden has warned about, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum has warned about, or rather they've, quote, predicted, unquote, that cyber attack. And what about neutral status for the Ukraine? That seems to be one of the most viable options to end the war, to bring peace to the Ukraine and the world, to avoid a third Jesuit world war. So what are the options? Let's get this right. I use a quote. Senator Lindsey Graham has called for the assassination of Russian President Vladimir Putin by someone close to him. Independent, 7th of March 2022, but also the BBC. Bye-bye Children reported on March 4th, 2022, Russian anger as Senator Lindsey Graham calls for Putin's assassination. I also like the New York Post, so let's read that as well, with some illustrations. But it's a very little amount of text, so I guess it can be read in 5 minutes or so. Balabolka is not working. Oh, and then the pictures are read out twice. Let's remove one. All right. Let's just read it like this. I'm not going to edit the text, otherwise it would take too long.
G. Brian Woolston. Ukraine men ordered to stay and fight Russia as others flee by Evan Simko Bednarski, February 25, 2022, 4:37 p.m. Updated fighting age men told to stay as tens of thousands of refugees flee Ukraine. Close more on, Ukraine war over 30 killed, 100 wounded in Russian rocket strike on Ukrainian station. EU imposes sanctions on Putin's daughters. Obama blasted for self-serving revisionist Russia comments during conference on disinformation. Pretty damn lucky. Fox News. Benjamin Hall gives update after Ukraine attack. Fighting age Ukrainian men have been ordered to stay behind as tens of thousands of civilians flee the country amid intensified fighting.
So I think it's wrong to fight our fellow humans, especially to kill innocent civilians. And the people responsible for these war crimes must be held accountable.
Ukraine announced late Thursday that men between the ages of 18 and 60 were forbidden from leaving the nation, which has been under martial law since the start of the Russian invasion. Some of the men were separated from their wives and children as they tried to board trains to flee, while others were stopped at the border. The Ukrainian authorities were nice, not rude, but they said that men have a duty to defend the country, said Raspetkovics, 50, at a train station. The United Nations Refugee Agency said Friday that more than 50,000 civilians had fled Ukraine since Wednesday, with many more making their way to the borders. People look on at the Polish border office as they wait for friends and family, who are fleeing the violence in Ukraine. People look on at the Polish border as they wait for friends and family who are fleeing violence in Ukraine. Brian Woolston, Reuters. A woman who claims to be a U.S. citizen cries after crossing the border and fleeing from Ukraine. A woman who claims to be a U.S. citizen cries after crossing the border to flee from Ukraine. Brian Woolston, Reuters. A family crosses the border into Poland, fleeing from the violence in Ukraine. A family crosses the border into Poland. Brian Woolston, Reuters. Ukraine war map. New York Post composite. The intense fighting continued Friday as Ukrainian troops took up defensive positions in the capital of Kyiv, where Russian bombardment carried on. Ukrainians trying to flee the capital for the western city of Lviv nearly caused a stampede at Kyiv's central rail station, prompting guards to reportedly fire warning shots into the air. Get the latest updates in the Russia-Ukraine conflict with the Post's live coverage. Others tried to leave by car, causing a second day of stop-and-go traffic. Filippo Grandi, the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, said in a tweet that the majority of those fleeing are crossing over into neighboring Poland and Moldova. Heartfelt thanks to the governments and people of countries keeping their borders open and welcoming refugees, he said. A woman with her daughter and mother exits the border crossing after fleeing violence in Ukraine. A woman, her daughter and mother cross into Poland. Brian Woolston, Reuters. A husband and wife are reunited after traveling separately through the border crossing while fleeing the violence in Ukraine. A husband and wife reunite after traveling separately to the border crossing. Brian Woolston, Reuters. Vilma Sugar, 68, of Uzhhorod in western Ukraine spoke to the Associated Press on Friday from Zony, Hungary, just across the border. She said her 47-year-old son had been stopped as they tried to leave Ukraine. "I'm shaking, I can't calm down," she said. "We crossed the border, but they just didn't let him come with us. We are trying to keep in touch with him on the phone, but it's hard because the line is bad." Kovacs said, "We women boarded the train, but the men were ordered to step to the side." Children wait on a bus after fleeing Ukraine into Poland with their mother. Brian Woolston, Reuters. A woman sits with her daughter after crossing the border into Poland. Brian Woolston, Reuters. A woman and her 3 children exit the border crossing. Ukrainian men have reportedly been stopped at the border crossing. Brian Woolston, Reuters. Daria from Kyiv, who would only give her first name, told reporters in Przemysl, Poland, that she witnessed similar restrictions. Even if the man was traveling with his own child, he couldn't cross the border, even with a kid, she said. Jagidini Williams, spokeswoman for the UN Refugee Agency, said in a videotaped statement, "Obviously, UNRWA is doing its utmost to try to access and provide whatever humanitarian assistance and protection will be needed. And we are staying put. We are in Ukraine with over 115 staff, we will bring reinforcements as is needed, and we have a similar number in the surrounding countries," she said. With Postwires.
I'm from Kiev. I traveled with my family to Western Ukraine just for vacation when it happened. So we decided yesterday that we want to leave the country because it's not clear what will be happening. I have a lot of my relatives in Kiev who are sitting in the bomb shelters right now because there is a bombing everywhere and people are afraid and scared. So we want to leave Ukraine right now, but I think that there is no possibility for men to leave. So we need to decide. I have a 5-year-old kid and I have also my sister who has 2 kids. So we are really scared and don't know what will happen here.
So in another article we can read, wow, it's not easy to say. In another article we can read that they were ordered to stay there. Befehl ist Befehl, etc. The map and over there it goes into Poland and then some other countries, and Turkey is over here basically. So they're going more south, perhaps based on that prediction on the sun.co.uk as well, also on the American sun, sun.com. There you can read that prediction. Anyway, let's see. Well, this is basically the same thing. First, why banning men from leaving Ukraine violates their human rights. I have to... Well, I can do it like this, so that I don't have to read all the other stuff. Yeah, I think that it's wrong to not let men that have not had any military training evacuate. That people that are not military should be allowed to evacuate to save the maximum number of civilians. And some people are keen on genociding as many of them as they can, which is also clear from that Cobden Club memo that I've covered. Anyway, we're not going into that, but population reduction is going on. There are people with a population reduction agenda to be aware of, especially when they have lots of power, control directed energy weapons, people's brain waves, and have a time-traveling synthetic telepathy machine that will never become the creator of heaven and earth.
Why banning men from leaving Ukraine violates their human rights. Published, March 8, 2022, 3:28 m GMT. As Ukraine scrambles to defend itself from Russia's illegal invasion, men aged 18 to 60 have been banned from leaving the country. The declaration of martial law in Ukraine gives the government power to enact this ban, but it is not in keeping with human rights or humanitarian norms. So, what is actually happening in Ukraine and what does the law say? What the Ukrainian government says. When Russia invaded last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Ukrainian civilians to defend their country.
Oh wow, my mic was off. So I was checking if this is the name Volodymyr Zelensky in Russian. The Twitter remark of 24th of February 2022, we will give weapons to anyone who wants to defend the country, be ready to support Ukraine in the squares of our cities. And I think that's one of the ways to end the war. If they arm 40 million Ukrainians, then the million Russian troops don't stand a chance anymore. It will be like another Vietnam. The Russians can't win anymore. So sorry about my mic being off. I don't know how they did that, but or how it happened. Let's read on.
As the Ukrainian Interior Ministry also posted on Telegram, today is the moment when every Ukrainian who can protect his home must take up arms. Not just to help our soldiers, but to cleanse Ukraine of the enemy once and for all. But if you are a man between 18 and 60, this call to arms may seem more like a compulsory requirement. As Ukraine's Border Guard Service explains, the ban on adult men leaving is aimed at guaranteeing Ukraine's defense and the organization of timely mobilization. What does self-defense look like? Given the illegality of Russia's invasion, Ukraine is entitled to defend itself under the United Nations Charter. Of course, a country will rely on all available military resources to exercise this right of self-defense. Ukraine already has a sizable army, with 200,000 active personnel and 300,000 reservists, as well as paramilitary forces who are now being mobilized under the General Mobilization Decree. A Ukrainian soldier and a militiaman help a fleeing family. A Ukrainian soldier and a militiaman help a fleeing family. Emilio Morinati, but Ukraine's military resources pale in comparison to Russia's modern, professional army built up through massive investment over the past decade. It has about 900,000 active personnel and about 2 million reservists. Given the obvious imbalance, it is not surprising Ukraine is now desperate to mobilize every eligible individual. But there is an important distinction between people who are conscripted into military service and people who are banned from leaving, but not then formally mobilized or equipped to fight. Conscientious objection with their country facing armed attack by a major military power with the aim of overthrowing their government, some Ukrainians have felt compelled to stay and potentially fight. Read more: how the Russian military remade itself into a modern, efficient and deadly fighting machine. Some have enlisted in the wake of Russia's invasion. These brand new soldiers have been called both conscripts and volunteers. Others have felt compelled to leave. The very nature of the conflict puts civilians at risk. It is playing out in densely populated cities, through shelling and aerial bombardment. Already more than 1 million people have fled. However, for men aged 18 to 60, the ban on leaving Ukraine means they have no choice to flee the attack and the risks they face as civilians in the theater of war. A New York Times podcast tells the story of an animator named Aaron, who unsuccessfully tried to cross the border into Poland. "I can't imagine myself doing military stuff, I have no experience in it. I'm afraid of holding a gun, I cannot imagine myself holding a gun." Aaron says he was shamed at the border by guards and others seeking to cross, but may try again to cross illegally. "They are bombing and people are dying, everyone is running, they are not going to stop. They just want to destroy." Meanwhile, there are reports LGBTQ+ Ukrainians are terrified of being targeted, given Russia's program of discrimination against gay and transgender people in Russia. What international law says? The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights guarantees freedom of thought, conscience and religion or belief. Although it does not specifically guarantee a right to conscientious objection to military service, the UN Human Rights Committee has confirmed this right derives from the protection under the convention. Ukrainians crowd into a bombed building, as they try to cross the border. The UN estimates more than 1 million people have fled Ukraine so far. Emilio Morinati /app. This means that if a person's conscience, religion or beliefs conflict with an obligation to use lethal force against other people, their right to conscientious objection to military service must be protected. Some human rights can be suspended or limited during a public emergency. But the right to freedom of conscience is specifically excluded from this category. What should Ukraine do? The government of Ukraine should cancel its ban on men leaving the country. To maintain it will violate the freedom of conscience of any man who wishes to flee due to a conscientious objection to killing others. In relation to LGBTQ+ people, the ban could also be regarded as preventing people with a well-founded fear of persecution from fleeing to seek refuge outside Ukraine. Read more: civilians are being killed in Ukraine. So, why is investigating war crimes so difficult? More broadly, repealing the departure ban would protect Ukraine from allegations it is failing to protect civilians, as required by international humanitarian law. It is one thing to conscript men into military service, providing training and appropriate equipment, although, even in that case, a right to conscientious objection must be respected. It is another thing entirely to prevent civilians from escaping a war zone. The international context: Ukraine must also consider how its actions reflect on parallel efforts to hold Russia accountable for its illegal aggression and potential violations of human rights. For example, Ukraine has requested the International Court of Justice to intervene with the international law equivalent of an injunction against Russia. Ukraine alleges Russia is using false accusations of genocide to justify an illegal invasion that is, in turn, inflicting human rights violations on the people of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the International Criminal Court's prosecutor has initiated an investigation of Russia's actions in Ukraine. The prosecutor has identified a reasonable basis to believe that alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity are underway in Ukraine. In this context, Ukraine must remain mindful of the legality of its own practice. The ban on men leaving Ukraine ought to be lifted, because it is legally and ethically wrong to force civilians to stay in harm's way when they have the opportunity and desire to escape.
Right. And the rest can be armed. So one of the ways to prevent a cyber attack on the global financial system, you will own nothing, declaring martial law, so the government can confiscate everything as part of that, of course. And that's why they need that cyber attack on the global financial system, which would make the banks trillions. All that money would be gone, all people's savings they've worked for all their lives would be totally gone. The banks would never have to pay it back. To impose a totalitarian New World Order, cashless society, etc. Which Biden mentioned, like Adolf Hitler, who was also a Knight of Malta like Biden, and he killed 60 million Europeans with his totalitarian New World Order pursuit. The Third Reich, the Neue Ordnung, remember? That's also a wiki article, and people can also check the Nazi Eugenics wiki article. That makes clear that, for example, the Rockefeller aided and abetted the Nazis, even funded Joseph Mengele, who also experimented on children, like they did with their emergency use authorized COVID-19 vaccines, they call them. So they experimented on children like the Nazis did. It was experimental. And, how can we let this happen? What can we do about it? Prevent that war from escalating, de-escalate the war somehow, expose them. And next we're gonna read this ledbible.com article. It's also reported by Newsweek. And I'm editing the article a little bit, taking out double remarks. Credit alarmy. I'll leave one of them. Okay.
He said more. Ukrainian president orders the release of all prisoners with combat experience. Stuart Berry. Published 2021. February 28, 2022 GMT, last updated 2100 hours, February 28, 2022 GMT, Ukrainian president orders the release of all prisoners with combat experience. Ukraine's president has ordered all inmates in the country with combat experience to be released from prison. As Russia continues to advance its military into the country, Volodymyr Zelensky said they need as many soldiers as possible to be sent to the front lines. While it might be concerning to think that prisoners would be let out into the public, the Ukrainian leader said it was necessary to defeat Russian forces. Ukrainians with real combat experience will be released from custody and will be able to compensate for their guilt in the hottest spots, Zelensky said. All sanctions against some individuals who participated in the anti-terrorist operation will be lifted. The key thing now is defense. Credit, Alamy. He added, when I went to the presidency, I said that each of us is the president. Because we are all responsible for our country. For our beautiful Ukraine. And now it has happened that each of us is a warrior. And I am sure that each of us will win. At the moment, all men aged between 18 to 60 have been banned from leaving the country so that they can protect Ukraine. The move was introduced by Ukraine's State Border Guard Service, DPSA, after President Zelensky imposed martial law following Russia's invasion into the country.
So when they are prisoners, that might indicate that they don't have a very strong moral compass or conscience. And they might just try to survive and use weapons also to plunder innocent Ukrainian civilians, etc. So I don't know. I think it might not be a good idea to just arm prisoners with combat experience.
The country's Interior Ministry announced a decision via telegram last week, according to Vice News. The declaration said, "The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine reports that due to the imposition of martial law in Ukraine, a certain category of citizens is temporarily restricted from leaving Ukraine. In particular, male citizens of Ukraine aged 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving Ukraine. Such a rule will apply for the period of martial law. We ask citizens to take this information into account." Credit, Etar TASS news agency, Alamy Live News. President Zelensky used his address to also urge Russian troops to abandon the war effort. He said more than 4,500 troops from the invading country have been killed during the conflict so far, and he said more bloodshed will continue if they don't back down immediately. "Abandon your equipment, get out of here. Don't believe your commanders. Don't believe your propagandists. Just save your lives," he said. He's also recently has signed an application for Ukraine to join the European Union. The move was announced as an historic moment by the Parliament of Ukraine on Twitter. The Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine also shared a picture of Zelensky adding his signature to the letter, as well as a picture of the application itself. "Our goal is to be with all Europeans and, most importantly, to be equal. I'm sure that's fair. I am sure we deserve it." The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Ukraine is one of us and we want them in the European Union.
So we should de-escalate, prevent a world war. Of course, things can go wrong. They might not have planned a world war, but a cyber attack on the global financial system to confiscate everything the people own. Of course, after the cyber attack, the normal procedure would be to repair everything quite fast. And also, right now, they must have decoupled the power supply, the power grid from the internet. And if they haven't done so, then that's criminal, because Biden and Schwab have both warned about this cyber attack. And people must also get storable food. Take your money out of the bank, withdraw all your savings, because they'll be gone. Only leave some money to pay the bills and get storable food. If everybody would run and get their money out of the bank right now, they'd only have 3% of that money. And warn others, especially warn others also, that Biden and Schwab have both warned about this cyber attack on the power supply, the internet, and they've held a cyber attack exercise in Israel with 10 countries practicing a cyber attack on the global financial system. And of course, it's very weird. Some people think it's all premeditated, because in the past with these wars, for example, Iraq and others, we didn't hear them say, "Oh, they're going to do a cyber attack next. We think they're going to do a cyber attack," with all kinds of predictions. Also, according to Reuters, Britain warned. That was one of the first articles I covered about that in previous broadcasts. So we must go for universal peace by whatever means necessary. Prevent a world war, stall, sabotage, and end a world war. World War III must never be. Prevent MAD, mutually assured destruction. What's next? We have some other articles, perhaps. Well, Newsweek reported the same thing. I was thinking this looks like an interesting related video loading, but if I click on it, nothing happens. That's on ledbible.com. And this is Zelensky telling us this himself with that logo behind him. It reminds me a bit of a trident of Antifa, for example. They may have used it as a symbol as well a couple of times. The ceasefire. Let's finish with the ceasefire wiki article. The CIA Vatican edited encyclopedia Wikipedia, which is clear from the logs, and mainstream media have also reported that the CIA and the Vatican are editing Wikipedia. I leave all the numbers in it.
A ceasefire, or truce, also spelled ceasefire, the antonym of open fire 1, is a temporary stoppage of a war in which each side agrees with the other to suspend aggressive actions. 2. Historically, the concept existed at least by the time of the Middle Ages, when it was known as a truce of God. 3. Ceasefires can be declared as a humanitarian gesture. 4. Be preliminary, that is, prior to a political agreement, or definitive, that is, with the intention of resolving a conflict. 5. Ceasefires may be declared as part of a formal treaty, but they have also been called as part of an informal understanding between opposing forces. 1. Ceasefires may be between state actors or involve non-state actors. 6. They may be formal, usually written, or informal. Their conditions may be public or secret. Ceasefires may occur via mediation or otherwise as part of a peace process or be imposed by United Nations Security Council resolutions via Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. 1. A ceasefire is usually more limited than a broader armistice, which is a formal agreement to end fighting. Ceasefires may be abused by parties as cover to rearm or reposition forces. 1-6, and they typically fail, when they are referred to as failed ceasefires. 7. However, successful ceasefires may be followed by armistices and then by peace treaties. The durability of ceasefire agreements is affected by several factors, such as demilitarized zones, withdrawal of troops and third-party guarantees and monitoring, for example peacekeeping. Ceasefire agreements are more likely to be durable when they reduce incentives to attack, reduce uncertainty about the adversary's intentions, and when mechanisms are put in place to prevent and control accidents from developing into conflict. (2020) Global Ceasefire Main article. Global Ceasefire. The 2020 Global Ceasefire was a response to a formal appeal by United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Manuel de Oliveira Guterres on March 23 for a global ceasefire as part of the United Nations response to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. On 24 June, 2020, 170 UN member states and observers signed a non-binding statement in support of the appeal, rising to 172 on 25 June, 2020, and on July 1, 2020, the UN Security Council passed a resolution demanding a general and immediate global cessation of hostilities for at least 90 days.
Well, why don't you do that? COVID is still there. I'm not going to cover the Assad thing, that's perhaps for another broadcast. And I'm going to switch back to the original illustration. So preventing beats curing, and elements in our government that are trying to bring about such a cyber attack must be arrested and prevented from doing so by whatever means necessary. You could argue such a cyber attack is also a war crime because it will mainly strike innocent civilians, not the military that are prepared for an EMP electromagnetic pulse attack and cyber attacks. So more ideas and discussions are possible. Skype Prologic999. I could also make a different Skype address, but I think that's just fine. Think about stuff we can do to de-escalate the war, to bring peace to the Ukraine. I think that would be a good idea for everyone. And that probably they won't benefit from it either in the long term, destroying civilization. And perhaps they won't control factors that control aging in time and die a horrible death. Who knows, perhaps they'll burn in lakes of fire or whatever. You have all that Bible prophecy, which could also be a war manual to bring it about, self-fulfilling prophecy rather than meant to prevent all that stuff. There are prophecies about the mark of the beast that are often mentioned by religious folk lately. And without that, people won't be able to buy or sell anything. So we must prevent that from being implemented by whatever means necessary. Bring peace instead of more war to the innocent civilians of the Ukraine. Of course, most people are not murderers. They're just trying to get by, to have a decent life, to survive. Survival is all. So, prepping can increase your chances of survival. I've also read stuff about the T4 bacteriophage nanobots, real T4 nanobots, and it's worth checking it out. I can't say too much on YouTube about stuff, but thank you all for watching. Kiss for single ladies who would like one, and see you next time on Play. Please like, share, subscribe, and spread important information that can prevent a cyber attack, a world war, and help to de-escalate the situation. Perhaps also have contact with people that could do something about it. If this is a premeditated cyber attack and it can be proven, then these people must be brought to justice one way or another. And one place to start is all these documents, the sparse document, Cyber Polygon, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are genocidal, that pretend that more than 500 million people is not sustainable, though 8 billion people are sustainable, as I've explained in previous broadcasts. So that's why sustainability is genocide. So it may sound very nice, ending world hunger, starvation, but in reality they want to do that by extermination of 7 billion innocent people. 7 billion people worldwide have to be exterminated to achieve this, quote, sustainability, unquote, based on their book quotes, $1 Million Georgia Guidestones. There is a conspiracy to reduce the global population, so that's a conspiracy fact, as well as the conspiracy to impose a totalitarian New World Order. More about all that and also how to prevent it in previous broadcasts. Thank you all for watching. See you next time on Play. I'm Ulrich Hoffman. May peace be with you all. And be prepared. Do the right thing. Depart from evil and do good. Keep what you have. And have an awesome one. Have an awesome day. Awesome orgasm. Burn 300 calories. And stop fighting and tell others to stop fighting, have a ceasefire and de-escalate, instead of impose more sanctions that will only affect innocent civilians, to escalate this into a cyber attack on the global financial system, to declare martial law and confiscate everything the people own, and put us all in concentration camps, the genocidal green zones of the CDC. So we must prevent that one way or another by whatever means necessary, because they are trying to reduce the global population by whatever means necessary. Clear from that Goblin Club memo that I've covered. And they are concentration camps because they're planning to concentrate risk group people into these camps. That's what the word is derived from. Concentrating certain groups of people into camps, concentration camps. So instead of that, we can have Blue Force tracking. And then the killer drones and Talon robots would shoot anybody that would break that home quarantine. And the CDC shielding approach document makes clear that the genocidal green zones may increase morbidity and mortality. Is that really what we want? That's one reason to say, not in our country, we can't let this happen, we can't go along with the Luciferian United Nations, NATO and the UN, when that leads to global genocide and it's in violation of international law. So prevent a genocidal cyber attack on the global financial system and take steps to be able to prove that certain people have done this deliberately, and take steps, press charges, and look at what the possibilities are when the judges are Freemasonic and also controllable with the same remote torture technology, and this is done by the intel agencies controlled by the Jesuits. According to that illustration on citizens.action.network on Facebook, all intel agencies are Luciferian, Freemasonic and controlled by the Jesuits. What some call the Black Pope, he prefers to be called the Superior General of the Jesuits, Arturo Sosa. Then they are to be held accountable one way or another, and things must change. The bankers make money from wars because the victor has to pay the debt of the vanquished. That's the deal they make with governments and others. And there must be legal construction laws that make that impossible to prevent these wars. War, what is it good for? Absolutely money. So, thank you all for watching. Universal Peace now. Until next time on Play. Stop war, start universal peace.